So, our last two shows answered two major questions. The first was, where am I? And the next was, who can I trust? And now I want to answer a very important third question, and that is, how did I lose trust in myself in the first place? Because unless you've done 50 years of healing and self development work, I bet there are still areas of your life where you could trust yourself just a little bit more. And that's the goal of healing, right? To get to a place where you can completely put your faith in the fact that you have the tools and the experience and the ability to make choices that are in your own best interest. And when things do go sideways, and they will, you have the ability to make it through and come out stronger on the other side. So, since this podcast is like one long ongoing conversation, and I don't want you to miss any part of it, make sure that you're subscribed and turn on notifications so that you know when new episodes drop. But I'll give you a hint, it's every Monday. Okay, let's get into it. Welcome to Jotindi, Journey to the Inner Divine, a sacred space for healing energy, emotional release, and soulful transformation. If you're ready to live with joy, ease, and purpose, you're in the right place. I want you to picture a little kid for a minute, and not necessarily yourself, but maybe it's your own child or a niece or nephew, or it could just be some random kid you saw in the grocery store. Now, when I picture little kids, I don't actually picture the tantrums first. I picture them laughing and playing and running around without a care in the world. I picture one of those little kids that casually turns to their mom and says something completely out of pocket, like, when I was big, I worked in a building downtown, right? And whether you believe in past lives or not, it's not really the point. The point is that they just say it. They don't stop and think, should I say this? Will people think that I'm weird? What if somebody laughs at me? Right? No, they just tell you what they're experiencing. And I think that that is really beautiful. Kids just come into the world incredibly connected to themselves. And not because they know everything, because they definitely don't, right? They have a lot to learn. Like they don't know not to touch a hot stove or how to navigate relationships or how to regulate their big emotions yet. But they do know one thing. They know exactly what they're feeling. If they're excited, they're excited. If they're hurt, they cry. If they're scared, they run to somebody they trust, right? They haven't learned to be ashamed of having needs. And they haven't decided that everybody else's opinion of their feelings matters more than their actual own experience. They're not thinking things like, I should probably keep this to myself so I don't make everybody else uncomfortable. They know the need, and then they express it because they trust that it matters. Now, imagine that same little girl. She falls down and scrapes her knee. In one world, someone scoops her up and says, "Oh, sweetheart, I know that hurt. Come here." Maybe they give her a hug and they help clean it up and they remind her that she's going to be okay. What does she learn from that experience? Well, she learns that pain is part of life and that difficult moments pass. And she learns that she can get hurt and still be okay. And she learns that when she's hurting, she deserves comfort. Now imagine a different world. She falls and she starts crying, and someone says, "Stop crying. You're fine. Don't be such a." What does she learn from that? Not that scraped knees don't hurt, because they still do, but she learns that her pain is inconvenient and that if she wants to stay protected, if she wants love and comfort, she had better start hiding the thing that she needs the comfort for. And I think that's where so much of this whole thing begins. And not because children decide to abandon themselves, because, they don't. I don't believe they do. Children are just brilliant at surviving. They are constantly asking one question without even realizing it. And that is, what do I need to do to stay connected to the people that I depend on? And sometimes that answer is to speak up. And sometimes that answer is to stay quiet. And sometimes the answer is to become the good kid or the funny kid or the perfect kid or the helper. Do whatever works. They're not choosing self abandonment per se, they're choosing connection. They're choosing protection and survival. And honestly, I think that that's exactly what they should do because they don't really have any other option. And the problem doesn't come until much later when we're adults, when we finally do have choices, but we're still living by the same rules that were written by a scared little version of ourselves. So, what happens? If we start out so connected to ourselves, how do we end up questioning every decision that we make? Well, life happens, and it usually starts with the people who love us the most. Now, before I say anything else, I do want to make one thing really clear. I do not think that most parents are waking up in the morning asking themselves, how can I disconnect my child from themselves today? Right? Of course not. People aren't like that. Most parents are just doing the best they can with what they were given. But the problem is that they're raising us with those same tools that they had, their fears and their conditioning and their unhealed wounds. And sometimes that can look like being told you're too emotional or too sensitive or to stop crying. Like maybe you were excited about something, but somebody laughed at you. Or maybe you had a bad feeling about something and someone told you, don't be silly. Little by little, you start learning that your own experience isn't as trustworthy as somebody else's opinion of it. And then school enters the picture, right? We all start kindergarten at 5 years old when we are highly impressionable. And all of a sudden, you're surrounded by dozens of other tiny little humans and teachers and staff, each one bringing their own family dynamics and beliefs and fears and conditioning with them. And now there's an added layer, and that's the pressure to fit in, right? To make friends, don't be teased. We're literally being graded on our performance and our behavior. And we feel this huge desire to start impressing people like our teachers and our parents and even the other kids, right? We need to be accepted. And if you've ever been picked last for a group project or laughed at in front of the class, then you probably learned something in that moment. Your brain starts paying very close attention. What do I need to do so this does not happen again? Because belonging matters, especially to kids. I mean, if you think back thousands of years ago, being rejected by the group could literally mean death, right? We needed to stay in our tribe in order to survive. And our brains are still carrying that piece of survival system. So when things like this happen, we learn to adapt. We become whatever version of ourselves seems most likely to keep us safe and connected. And then, if home wasn't a safe place, if you were raised with neglect or addiction or abuse, those adaptations become even stronger. If you had an angry parent at home, you learned to read the room before you even walked into it. And if you had someone at home who was needy, and whether that was by choice or by no fault of their own, maybe like a disabled sibling or something, either way, you learn to anticipate everybody else's needs before your own. And the heartbreaking part of it is that those strategies that you developed, they probably worked. They helped you survive and to be taken care of. And they helped you stay connected to the people that you depended on for your literal survival. But the problem is, a lot of us are walking around still living by those same survival strategies, only it's decades later. We don't need those survival strategies anymore. Sometimes we don't really realize just how early those beliefs begin. Sometimes we think they start in high school or in our first relationship or some other major life event. But sometimes they start when we're so little kids, like I said, 5 years old. I know mine did. When I was about 8 years old, I was walking to my after school program, and I remember thinking, if the world would just take me seriously, I would move out and start living my life as an adult right now. And I genuinely believed I could do it. Well, now when I look at 8-year-olds, all I see is children, like practically babies. And I have to grieve for my 8-year-old self, thinking that living on my own at that age was a better option than living at home. And it's actually gut wrenching because I know that I am not the only 8-year-old to feel like that. And I'm not sharing that to put anybody down or to blame anybody. I'm just telling you to show you that there are so many things that happen in our lives that probably should lead to a loss of trust in someone else, but instead, they lead to a loss of trust in ourselves. Because a child will naturally assume that if something is wrong, it must be me, instead of thinking the adults around me couldn't meet my needs. And that's the pivot. That is why our self trust gets broken. Not because we made a conscious choice to abandon ourselves, because as kids, we don't, but we're choosing the protection and the survival. And then after years and years of doing this, after years of learning to fit in and to keep the peace and to make everybody else comfortable, we get really, really good at leaving ourselves behind. And like I've said a bunch of times, we're not doing this on purpose. In fact, I think most of the time we're trying to do the exact opposite, right? We're trying to be good people and to be kind and loving and to be the kind of person that everybody wants to be around. But the problem is that along the way, we're asking ourselves what we think. And maybe you've had one of those moments where somebody asks you something like, "What do you want to eat?" And your first instinct is to say, "I don't care." And sometimes, that's true. You don't care. It's not a big deal. But sometimes you do. But you've just gotten so good and so used to making sure that everybody else is happy that you don't even stop long enough to check in with yourself. And that might sound like a tiny thing, but those little moments add up. Every time that you ignore that little feeling because you don't want to disappoint someone, or you talk yourself out of your own opinion because somebody else sounds really confident, or something inside you is screaming, "This doesn't feel right," but you convince yourself that you're just overthinking, you're actually practicing something. You are practicing choosing somebody else's voice over your own. And after years of practicing that, it starts to feel normal, right? That's what they say, practice makes perfect. And that's what I think self abandonment really is. Sometimes it's like really obvious where one of these beliefs come from. Like there's one big dramatic moment where you subconsciously decide to be different. For me, I was 12 years old and I called my dad to ask him if he was making the right decision with something that was a pretty big decision. And he did not like that. He didn't like that at all. And as a result, we didn't speak for 5 years. And what I learned in that moment was that if I wanted to stay connected to him, I was going to go along to get along, so to speak. I wasn't to voice my opinions if they differed from his, and that was that. Other times, it's death by paper cuts, right? There's 1,000 tiny moments where you slowly stop checking in with the person who's been with you all along, which is yourself. Like every time you get in trouble for not washing the dishes well enough, or disappoint your parents by not getting high enough grades, things that you can hardly remember, but slowly condition you to believe that you're not good enough. You stop believing that your feelings have something to teach you and that your needs matter. And you stop believing that your own experience deserves a seat at the table. And and here's the part that makes me so sad, that most people blame themselves for this. They're thinking things like, "I should know better. I need to be stronger," or "if only I had more confidence." But I don't think that's the truth at all. I think that you became incredibly skilled at adapting, that you learned how to survive in the environment that you were in, and that you learned how to protect your relationships. And you learned how to stay connected to the people that you depended on. And all of those are very intelligent adaptations. The problem is that survival skills don't become healthy life skills. And what kept you safe when you were 8 years old might be the very thing keeping you stuck at 38. And if that's true, well, maybe there's nothing wrong with you after all. Maybe you've just been practicing the wrong skill for a really long time. So, why do we keep abandoning ourselves, even when we can see ourselves doing it? Have you ever noticed that? Like you'll be in the middle of conversation and you can actually feel yourself saying yes, and every part of you wants to say no, or maybe you're apologizing for something that really was not your fault at all, or you're explaining away a feeling that you know is trying to tell you something. And afterward, you think to yourself, why did I do that again? I saw it coming and I still did it. Well, it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's just that self-abandonment can actually be a trauma response. Now, I know when I say the word trauma, people immediately think of a huge life-changing event. And yes, those absolutely shape us. But trauma can also be something so much more subtle than that. Remember when I mentioned being raised in a home that maybe had addiction problems or neglect? Those are forms of trauma too. And sometimes it's just years of feeling like you had to earn love. Or sometimes it's growing up in a house where you never knew what version of someone you were coming home to. But whatever your story is, your brain has one job, and it is to keep you alive. So unfortunately, it doesn't spend a whole lot of time asking, is this helping me become my most authentic self? Instead, it's asking, what is the safest thing that I can do right now? And sometimes the safest thing you can do is to speak up, but sometimes it's to stay quiet or agree or keep the peace or make yourself smaller. And those aren't character flaws, they're just survival strategies. But unfortunately, your brain doesn't always automatically get the memo that you're safe now. And it keeps using strategies that worked before, even if they're hurting you today. And that is also why healing can feel so frustrating sometimes, because one part of you knows that you don't have to live that way anymore, while another part of you is still trying to protect you in the only way that it knows how. But at some point, we need to step back and see things for what they are and start to choose ourselves again. Remember when I mentioned that disagreement with my dad? Well, as a child, I created the meaning that speaking up isn't safe. But as an adult, I can step back and see maybe my dad just couldn't tolerate disagreement. And what happened between us probably had very little to do with me and a lot more to do with something that was going on inside him. And if we never step back to redefine the meaning of our situations, they keep running the same programs in the background, making you feel small and stuck and disempowered. And this is where compassion becomes so important. Because when you begin to find this awareness, a lot is going to come up for you. And when you understand that your brain has just been trying to protect you this whole time, it makes it a whole lot easier to stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what was I protecting? Now, I'm not saying that every belief or behavior you learned is bad or that every expectation placed on you was wrong. We all need to adapt. We all need to learn how to live in families and communities and have relationships. And some of those lessons help us become compassionate and thoughtful and emotionally mature. So please don't misunderstand. Not all of the adaptations that we create as we grow up are harmful. I'm mainly just focusing on the ones that are not so helpful right now. And I know that this episode so far has been a little heavy. We talked about our childhood and trauma and conditioning and self abandonment. And maybe you recognized yourself in one or more of those stories. But I really don't want you to walk away from this episode thinking, well, great, now I know everything that's wrong with me. Because that's not what I'm saying at all. If anything, I really hope that you walk away thinking, wow, maybe I've been a lot harder on myself than I needed to be. Because there's really good news in all of this. And that is that everything that we've talked about today was learned, right? You weren't born doubting yourself or believing that your needs didn't matter or apologizing for taking up space. Those were survival skills that you developed. And if you can learn one way of living, you can learn another. And that's what the goal of healing really is, right? It's not to become somebody completely different or to pretend that your past never happened. It's to just start with awareness, with tapping back into the memories that have almost faded into the background and finding the meaning in them. And I mean little things like that tiny comment somebody said one time, or the look on someone's face, or maybe somebody made a mean joke, or a silence that felt like torture. You know, the thing that didn't seem important at all until maybe 30 years later. It's revisiting those moments and realizing that maybe that was the moment that you started to believe that you were too much or not enough. And that's where the true healing starts, is when you stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, where did I learn that? Healing is slowly building a new relationship with yourself and checking in with yourself before you start checking in with everybody else. It's about getting honest about what you're feeling, even when you don't like the answer. And it's noticing that little voice inside you again, even if at first it's just a tiny whisper. Because remember, that voice, she never left you. Life just gets loud. And every time that you choose to pause, and every time that you are honest with yourself about how you feel, you're turning the volume back up on that little voice. And please don't be worried that you don't have all the answers yet, because it's not time for that. For now, just focus on awareness. This week, I don't want you to change anything. I just want you to notice. I want you to notice the moments when you choose yourself, and notice the moments when you choose everybody else first. And notice what happens in your body when you do this, and the story that your mind is telling you. Because you can't change a pattern that you can't see. I've been doing this work for years, and I can honestly tell you that I know myself better now than I ever have before. I know what matters to me and what I want, and when something feels aligned. And it did take a lot of self reflection and journaling and brutal honesty with myself. But that's what I want for you. I want you to know yourself better. I want you to recognize your feelings and the intentions behind them. And I want you to have the ability to choose yourself again and again. I want you to become so deeply connected with yourself that when your life gets messy, and believe me, it will, that you don't abandon yourself anymore, that you stay and you listen and you find your way through. And before we wrap up, I just want to leave you with one final question. What would your life look like if you had just a little bit more trust in yourself? What kinds of choices would you make? And what things would you say yes to? Or what things would you say no to? And I really do want to know. So let me know in the comments on Spotify, or you can leave it in the review section on Apple. What would need to change in your life in order for you to be able to trust yourself just 10% more? And to help you figure this out, I've created this free resource called the Clarity Map. And it has journaling prompts and guides, and it walks you through a process where you can find the answers that you're looking for. And you can download yours at the link in the show notes or at mariahaurora.com/freebie/clarity. So thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope I really got your mind working and got you thinking. And if you can think of anybody that might benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And don't forget, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path.